I watched David pack the last of his things with practiced detachment, a skill I'd perfected over 15 years of marriage. His movements were hurried, almost frantic, as if he feared I might change my mind about letting him walk away with what he thought was everything. "The joint account transfer should complete by tomorrow," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I've left you enough for a month's expenses. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches. You make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Enough. As if $2,300 was enough to rebuild a life he'd just shattered. As if taking 78,000's 642s, our supposed joint savings, was reasonable when leaving your wife of 15 years. I said nothing, just sipped my coffee, watching him over the rim of the mug my grandmother had given me before she died. The one asset he hadn't cataloged in his meticulous spreadsheet of our marriage's dissolution. "Eleanor, don't make this harder," David sighed, running his hand through the salt and pepper hair that had once made my heart race. Now I just noted how his designer watch, my Christmas gift from last year, caught the afternoon light streaming through our kitchen windows. "We've discussed this. A clean break is better." "Of course," I replied, my voice steady. "You and Jessica need a fresh start." His head snapped up at the name, eyes narrowing. "How did you—" 3 years sharing a cell phone plan gives one access to interesting text message records. I smiled, the expression not reaching my eyes. Especially when one's husband isn't particularly tech-savvy about deleting things. David's face flushed. At 46, he still blushed like the 30-year-old financial advisor I'd married, back when I believed his promises about building a life together. "She's not why I'm leaving," he lied, the same way he'd been lying for the past 18 months. "We've grown apart, Eleanor. You know that." I did know things had changed. I just didn't share his selective amnesia about why. "Must be nice," I mused, tracing the rim of my coffee cup. "Starting over at your age with a 29-year-old paralegal and a healthy bank account." His jaw tightened. "The money's as much mine as yours. I earned most of it." That was his first mistake, believing the narrative he'd constructed over 15 years. David Reynolds, financial genius, supporting his modestly successful children's book illustrator wife. David Reynolds, making all the important money decisions because Eleanor, bless her heart, just didn't have the head for finances. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. If only he knew. "Of course you did," I agreed pleasantly. "Just like this house is as much yours as mine, despite being a family property I inherited." He had the decency to look uncomfortable at that. The Victorian brownstone in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood, worth roughly $4.2 million in today's market, had been in my family for 3 generations. Yet somehow, in David's mental accounting, it had transformed into a joint asset that he was generously letting me keep in the divorce. "You'll be fine, Ellie," he said, using the nickname I'd always hated. "You've got your little books in this giant house. Sell it if you need money. Downsize." My little books, 32 published children's titles, translated into 14 languages. But in David's world, they were just cute drawings that provided me a charming hobby while he did the real work. "I'll manage," I said simply. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, a smile involuntarily lifting the corners of his mouth. Jessica, no doubt, eager to begin their new life funded by my savings. "I should go," he said suddenly in a hurry. "The movers have everything else." I nodded, remaining seated at our antique cherrywood kitchen table, another family heirloom he'd categorized as jointly acquired furniture. He hesitated at the doorway, perhaps waiting for tears, recriminations, or a last minute plea. When none came, uncertainty flickered across his face. "The papers are with Madison," he said, referring to his attorney. "Just standard terms. Nothing complicated." Nothing complicated. 15 years reduced to standard terms. I've scheduled a meeting with her, I replied. Next Tuesday. Relief washed over his features. Good. That's good. He lingered another moment, then nodded awkwardly. Goodbye, Eleanor. The front door closed with a soft click that belied the magnitude of its finality. I remained at the table, listening as his BMW purred to life in the driveway, tires crunching on gravel as he pulled away toward his new life. Only then did I allow my shoulders to relax, setting down the coffee mug I'd been clutching like a shield. Marcus cleared his throat. Eleanor, perhaps you should explain the full scope of what you're planning. I looked around the table at the team who had helped me maintain my secret life. They deserved to understand. For 15 years, I've allowed my husband to believe we were living primarily on his income as a financial advisor. He believes our joint savings, the nearly $80,000 he's taken, represent the bulk of our liquid assets, aside from retirement accounts and the house he generously left me. I opened my own portfolio, withdrawing several documents. What David doesn't know is that the Eleanor Reynolds who illustrates children's books is merely a small facet of Eleanor Blackwood, who controls assets worth approximately $3.7 billion through a complex network of shell companies, trusts, and private holdings. I handed the documents to Diane. My husband is about to use what he thinks is our life savings to start over with his girlfriend. I want him to feel that security for exactly 3 days. Then I want it all to disappear. Robert Daltrey, my operations manager, leaned forward. Disappear how exactly? Legally, of course, I replied with a thin smile. The accounts David accessed weren't actually joint accounts, despite the paperwork he's seen over the years. They were Blackwood Financial controlled accounts with specific triggering mechanisms. Diane flipped through the documents, her eyebrows rising. These are brilliant, she murmured. Conditional release clauses tied to specific withdrawal patterns. And amounts. The moment he tries to move a significant portion. The accounts lock, an automatic fraud investigation launches, and David finds himself temporarily without access to funds while the bank investigates, I finished. All perfectly legal, all documented in the fine print he never bothered to read when I had him sign the account forms years ago. Marcus couldn't help a small smile. You've been planning this for how long? I've had contingencies in place since year 3 of our marriage, I admitted. Updated them regularly as I watched David become increasingly enamored with his own financial narrative. And what happens after his accounts freeze? Asked Sarah Winters, my public relations director. That's when Eleanor Blackwood officially returns to Boston society, I said. The Blackwood Financial Group announces its new chairperson, me, following my 15-year sabbatical. Press releases go out. Interviews are scheduled. The whole world learns that the children's book illustrator from Beacon Hill is actually the controlling shareholder of one of New England's largest private financial groups. And your husband learns it through the morning news, Marcus concluded. Precisely. The room was silent for a moment. It's ruthlessly elegant, Diane finally said. But why let him take the money at all? Why not confront him directly? I considered the question, though I'd answered it for myself years ago, because David didn't just take my money. He took my trust, my time, and 15 years of my life where I hid who I really was to make him comfortable. I set my portfolio down with a decisive click. I want him to experience the exact same feeling I had watching him pack. The certainty that he knows exactly where he stands, followed by the realization that everything he believed was a carefully constructed illusion. Robert nodded slowly. Poetic. Expensive poetry, Marcus noted wryly. I can afford it, I replied. Now, shall we begin? For the next 3 hours, we meticulously outlined the unwinding of 15 years of financial camouflage. Complex trusts would be simplified, shell companies consolidated, and hidden assets brought to light. By the end of the week, Eleanor Blackwood would exist again not just as a legal entity, but as a public figure. "What about the house?" Sarah asked as we concluded. "The Beacon Hill property?" "What about it?" I replied. "Well, it's actually owned by Blackwood Heritage Trust, not you personally. Will you transfer it?" I shook my head. "No, that stays as is. David believes I inherited it from family, which is partially true, but he doesn't need to know that my family property is actually part of a $300 million historic real estate portfolio managed by a trust I control." Marcus closed his portfolio. "I think we're clear on next steps then. We monitor the accounts David has access to, wait for him to make significant withdrawals or transfers, then initiate the security protocols. Simultaneously, we begin the public reemergence of Eleanor Blackwood and the restructuring of your holdings." "Perfect," I agreed. "How quickly can we move on the press strategy?" Sarah consulted her notes. "We can have everything ready to launch in 3 days. I've already drafted releases and contacted our media partners for embargo agreements." "Good. I have a feeling David won't waste time moving that money," I said. "After all, Jessica is expecting her dream life to begin immediately." I pulled my phone from my pocket and sent a single text. "He's gone. Initiate protocol Icarus." 3 dots appeared immediately, then a response. "Confirmed. Timeline activated. Meeting set for 9 a.m. tomorrow." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 15 years of careful planning and deliberate misdirection lifting. For over a decade, I had played a role so convincingly that my own husband never suspected who I really was. It wasn't just about the money, though there was certainly that. It was about control, about the pleasure of knowing something others didn't, about creating a sanctuary of financial independence that no one could infiltrate, especially not a husband who, despite his professional credentials, had never bothered to look beyond the facade I'd carefully constructed. I stood, walking to the antique roll-top desk in the corner of our kitchen. Another family piece, this one with a secret even David didn't know about after living with it for 15 years. My fingers found the hidden latch, pressing it with practiced ease. The false back of the top drawer slid open silently, revealing a slim, leather-bound ledger and a small golden key, the first pieces of who Eleanor Reynolds really was. The next morning dawned clear and cold, a perfect Boston autumn day. I dressed. With deliberate care, a charcoal gray pantsuit that David had always said made me look severe, paired with a cream silk blouse and the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me. Professional, polished, and nothing like the soft, artistic persona David was familiar with. By 8:30, I was walking through the imposing glass doors of Blackwood Financial Management in downtown Boston. The receptionist looked up with the practiced smile of someone paid to recognize wealth and power. "Good morning. How may I help you?" "Eleanor Blackwood to see Marcus Chen," I said, using my maiden name for the first time in 15 years. It felt like stepping back into my own skin. Her eyes widened slightly, the only indication she recognized the name, before she nodded. "Of course, Ms. Blackwood. Mr. Chen is expecting you." I was escorted to the executive elevator bank, bypassing the standard security protocols. The young assistant accompanying me kept darting curious glances my way. "Is something wrong?" I asked, as the elevator ascended to the 47th floor. "No, ma'am," he replied quickly. "It's just, we don't often see Mrs. Blackwood in person," I smiled. "It's Ms. Blackwood now, and unusual circumstances call for unusual measures." The elevator opened directly into a sleek reception area where a dignified woman in her 60s immediately stood. "Ms. Blackwood," she greeted me warmly. "It's been too long." "Hello, Charlotte," I replied, accepting her brief hug. "Thank you for keeping all my secrets." Charlotte had been my father's executive assistant for 30 years and had seamlessly transitioned to helping me maintain my hidden empire after his death. She was one of exactly 3 people who knew the full extent of my financial reality. Marcus is waiting, she said, leading me to a set of double doors. The team is assembled in the conference room. Marcus Chen, my father's protege and my most trusted advisor, rose as I entered his corner office. At 55, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who managed billions without needing to broadcast it. "Eleanor," he said, taking my hands in his. "Are you certain about this timeline? We could extend it, give you more time." I shook my head. "David's made his move. I see no reason to continue the charade." Marcus nodded, though concern still creased his brow. 15 years is a long cover to blow in a single day. 15 years is exactly why it needs to end now, I countered. I've lived a half-life long enough. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. The team is prepared. We can begin, unwinding the structures immediately. I followed him through another set of doors into a large conference room where 5 people sat waiting. My core team at Blackwood Financial, the true financial managers of my family's fortune. They rose as I entered, some looking faintly surprised. Most had only interacted with me through secure video calls or encrypted messages for the past decade. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I said, taking my place at the head of the table. "As you've been informed, Protocol Icarus has been activated. It's time for Eleanor Blackwood to return." Diane Lakhani, my head of legal affairs, opened a sleek leather portfolio. "All the documentation is prepared. We can begin the process of transferring assets back into your direct control immediately." I nodded. "Let's start with the accounts David believes are our joint savings." Diane exchanged glances with Marcus. "You want to move on those first, before he's had a chance to access them?" "No," I replied, a hint of steel entering my voice. "I want him to access them. In fact, I'm counting on it." Confusion flickered across several faces. As the meeting concluded and the team filed out, Marcus remained behind. "You know this goes beyond financial reconfiguration," he said quietly. "You're fundamentally changing the life you've built for 15 years. I nodded, feeling the weight of that truth. The life I built was always temporary, Marcus. A character I played while I healed from my father's death, while I figured out if I could trust David with the truth. "And you decided you couldn't," he observed. "Years ago, it seems." Yes. The admission was both painful and liberating. When we'd been married about 3 years, I almost told him everything, had it all planned out. Then I overheard him on the phone with a colleague, laughing about how he had lucked out with a wife who was financially naive and easily impressed by his moderate success. Marcus winced. He liked feeling superior, Marcus. Needed it even. I realized then that my wealth would fundamentally change how he saw himself in our relationship. "So you decided to keep playing the part." "I did," I acknowledged. "And somewhere along the way, it became easier to maintain the illusion than confront the reality that I'd married someone who needed me to be less so he could feel like more." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "And the children's books? Were those part of the character too?" At that, I smiled genuinely. No. Those were always real. Perhaps the only authentic thing I shared with David. Then at least something good came from these years, he said kindly. I gathered my things, suddenly eager to move forward with the plan. "Let's make sure everything's in place. I want no delays once David makes his move." "It will be," Marcus assured me. "And Eleanor? For what it's worth, I'm glad you're finally stepping back into the light." As I left Blackwood Financial and headed back to Beacon Hill, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the exhilarating lightness of freedom approaching. Soon, I would no longer need to hide bank statements, maintain separate phones, or pretend ignorance about investment strategies I had helped pioneer. Soon, I could simply be Eleanor Blackwood again, without apology or pretense. My phone chimed with a text from Charlotte. "Dee has accessed account number 4. Transfer of $50,000 initiated. To new account in his name only." So it had begun. David wasn't wasting any time separating our financial lives, or rather, separating what he thought was my financial life from his. I smiled as I texted back, "Perfect. Let him enjoy it for exactly 3 days." Then execute phase 2. The following. Morning. I awoke to an unexpected knock at my front door. Opening it, I found a courier holding a large manila envelope. "Eleanor Reynolds?" he asked, checking his digital pad. "Yes, that's me. Please sign here." I scrawled my signature and took the envelope, already knowing what it contained before I saw the return address for Madison Clark, attorney at law. David had wasted no time having divorce papers delivered. Efficient, when motivated by new love and stolen money. I took the envelope to my kitchen, making a cup of tea before examining its contents. The documents were exactly what I'd expected. Standard divorce filing for the state of Massachusetts, with terms that could only be described as insultingly favorable to David. According to the proposed settlement, I would keep the house and my business, my work as an illustrator, while David would retain his retirement accounts, our joint savings, which he'd already taken, and all investments made during our marriage. What David didn't realize was that there were no investments made during our marriage, at least none in our names. Every significant investment had been made through Blackwood financial channels, carefully structured to appear separate from both of us. I set the papers aside and picked up my phone, dialing Diane Lacani. He's moved quickly with the legal side. I told her when she answered, "I've just received divorce papers." "We expected that," Diane replied. "Does he specify that he's already taken the joint savings?" "No, he simply lists them as assets he'll retain. Convenient omission." "Perfect," she said, and I could hear her smile through the phone. "That strengthens our position for what comes next. Has he made any attempt to contact you since leaving?" "Not a word," I replied. "But he's been busy setting up his new life. According to our monitoring, he's already put a deposit down on a luxury condo downtown." "Using the funds from your joint account?" "Naturally," Diane made a small, satisfied sound. "Then everything is proceeding as anticipated. By my calculation, we can trigger the account security protocols tomorrow afternoon." "And the press announcement?" "Sarah has everything prepared for release the following morning. Your reemergence as Eleanor Blackwood will be front-page news by Thursday." I found myself smiling, a real smile that reached my eyes for the first time in months. Then I believe it's time I prepared for my debut. After ending the call, I walked through the house that had been my sanctuary and my prison for 15 years. Beautiful, historic, and filled with treasures David had never fully appreciated or understood. In the master bedroom, I opened the walk-in closet that had always been partitioned. David's meticulously organized designer suits on one side, my artistic but modestly priced wardrobe on the other. I pressed against the back panel of my side, triggering a hidden mechanism that caused the entire wall to slide silently aside, revealing a second closet behind it. Here hung the real Eleanor Blackwood's wardrobe, couture pieces from Paris and Milan, custom-tailored suits from London, evening gowns worn to charity events in Europe where I knew David would never see photos or recognizable faces. I ran my fingers along the garments, feeling the exquisite fabrics and remembering the freedom I felt during my brief business trips abroad. The few weeks each year when I could step out of Eleanor Reynolds' life and back into my own. Those trips had been my salvation, allowing me to periodically reconnect with the financial empire I continued to guide from afar, to make appearances at key Blackwood Foundation events, and to simply exist as myself without constraint. David had never questioned these trips, assuming they were related to international publishing of my books. He'd even encouraged them, enjoying his own freedom during my absence. I selected several outfits for the coming days, laying them on the bed. The Eleanor Blackwood who would emerge this week needed to project confidence, power, and unquestionable competence. Next, I moved to my home office, the converted sunroom where I created my illustrations and that David rarely entered, considering it my creative space. Behind a false wall panel disguised as a bookshelf lay a state-of-the-art secure communication system that connected directly to Blackwood Financial's networks. I logged in, checking the status of David's recent financial activities. As expected, he'd been busy. Beyond the initial $50,000 transfer, he'd moved another $20,000 to a separate account, presumably for Jessica. He'd also made a $15,000 down payment on a BMW X5, Jessica's favorite car, according to text messages I'd seen months ago. $85,000 spent in just under 2 days. David was certainly making up for lost time, splashing out on all the things he thought would impress his young girlfriend. I typed a quick message to the monitoring team. Target has made significant expenditures. Are we still on schedule for security? Protocol initiation? The response came moments later. Confirmed. Account security protocol set for activation at 2:00 p.m. tomorrow. I closed the system and replaced the bookshelf, then sat at my drawing table. Despite everything happening, I had a deadline for my latest book illustrations. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even as I prepared to reveal myself as one of Boston's wealthiest women, I was still honoring commitments to a career I'd genuinely come to love. I worked steadily through the afternoon, losing myself in the familiar comfort of creating whimsical images for children. This part of my life hadn't been a lie, and I found solace in that knowledge. As evening approached, I received another text from the monitoring team. Target and companion dining at Soralina. $700 wine selection ordered. Payment attempted with joint credit card you canceled yesterday. Card declined. Payment completed with his personal card. I smiled at the image this conjured. David, trying to impress Jessica with expensive wine, facing the embarrassment of a declined card. It was just a small taste of what awaited him tomorrow. My phone rang. An unknown number. I answered cautiously. Eleanor? It's David. His voice was tight, controlling anger poorly disguised as concern. Hello, David. Is something wrong? Did you cancel our joint credit card? He demanded. I kept my voice calm, slightly confused. I didn't think we had joint cards anymore. Wasn't that part of our clean break? Don't play innocent, he snapped. I was just embarrassed in front of... He stopped abruptly. In front of Jessica? I supplied helpfully. How uncomfortable for both of you. His exhale was sharp with frustration. Look, I'm trying to be civil about this divorce, but if you're going to play financial games, I repeated slowly, savoring the phrase. That's an interesting choice of words from someone who emptied our savings account within hours of leaving. That money was as much mine as yours, he said defensively. More mine, really, since I was the primary earner. There it was, the narrative he'd constructed, and I'd allowed him to believe for 15 years. Was that the only reason for your call? I asked. To complain about a canceled credit card? He paused, clearly thrown by my lack of emotion. I also wanted to let you know I've scheduled a meeting with Madison for Thursday to discuss the divorce terms I sent over. Thursday won't work for me, I replied. I have a prior commitment. What? Commitment could possibly be more important than sorting out our divorce? He asked incredulously. You'd be surprised, I said. I can meet next Monday instead. He made an impatient sound. Fine, Monday at 2:00, Madison's office. Actually, I'll have my attorney contact Madison to arrange a suitable location, I countered. Your attorney? Since when do you have an attorney? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Since I decided I deserved proper representation in this divorce. Goodbye, David. I ended the call before he could respond, feeling a small thrill at the confusion I'd heard in his voice. David had expected tears, recriminations, or desperate pleas, not this calm assertion of boundaries. Tomorrow would shatter his expectations entirely. At precisely 2 p.m. the following day, I was sitting in Marcus Chen's office, watching a large monitor that displayed David's bank accounts in real time. As planned, my team had set up a legal observation protocol. All actions were being recorded and documented by Blackwood Financial's compliance department. 3, 2, 1. Marcus counted down softly. On the screen, a series of red flags appeared, next to David's newly established accounts. Access status changed from active to restricted, and notification alerts were automatically generated. Simultaneously, David's phone would be receiving security alerts about suspicious activity on his accounts. He would soon discover that all the money he'd transferred, our entire joint savings, was now inaccessible pending a fraud investigation. Perfect execution, Marcus noted, checking the time. Now we wait for his reaction. We didn't wait. Long. At 2:07 p.m., David's name appeared on Marcus's phone. He's calling Blackwood Financial's customer service line, Marcus observed. They'll transfer him to our special handling team. I nodded, impressed by his predictability. The accounts David had accessed were actually sophisticated Blackwood Financial products disguised as ordinary bank accounts. When he called what he thought was his bank, he was actually calling a subsidiary of my company. A minute later, Marcus's secure line rang. He answered, putting it on speaker. Mr. Chen, we have David Reynolds on a priority line regarding the Icarus Protocol accounts. How would you like us to proceed? Implement standard security review procedures, Marcus replied. Inform him that unusual activity has triggered automatic protections, that all funds are secure but temporarily inaccessible pending investigation. Estimated resolution time, 3 to 5 business days. Understood. The line disconnected. Marcus looked at me. That should keep him contained until tomorrow's announcement. Has Sarah confirmed the press schedule? I asked. Yes. The Boston Globe gets the exclusive at 6 a.m. All other major outlets will receive the press packet by 7 Your official statement is scheduled for release at 9 and your CNBC interview is confirmed for 11 I took a deep breath. Then by this time tomorrow, Eleanor Blackwood will be fully resurrected. Marcus hesitated, then asked the question I knew had been on his mind. Are you absolutely certain about this approach? Once you go public, there's no going back to anonymity. I've been anonymous for 15 years, Marcus, I replied. I've hidden my accomplishments, diminished my intelligence, and pretended to be someone else to protect a man's ego. I'm done with that life. He nodded. Then let's make sure your reemergence is flawless. We spent the next several hours finalizing details for tomorrow's rollout. As we worked, reports continued to come in from the monitoring team. 14 p.m. Target attempted to withdraw cash from ATM. Transaction declined. 22 p.m. Target visited bank branch in person. Was informed by manager that security team would need to complete investigation before access could be restored. 47 p.m. Target called customer service a second time. Became verbally aggressive. Was informed that continued aggressive behavior would further delay investigation. By evening, everything was in place. I returned to the Beacon Hill house for what would be my last night as merely Eleanor Reynolds, children's book illustrator. Tomorrow, Boston and the financial world would meet the real me. As I prepared for bed, my phone lit up with a text from David. Something's wrong with my accounts. All of them. Did you do something? I read it twice, appreciating the panic underlying those simple words. He was only beginning to realize that his carefully constructed new life was built on a foundation of sand. I chose not to respond. David would have his answers soon enough, just not the ones he was expecting. Before sleep, I sent one final message to the team monitoring Protocol Icarus. All systems go for tomorrow. Eleanor Blackwood returns at dawn. Then I turned off my phone, closed my eyes, and slept more peacefully than I had in 15 years, dreaming of the look on David's face when he discovered exactly who he had walked away from and what he had unwittingly left behind. The morning light filtered through the century-old stained glass panels that framed my bedroom windows, casting prismatic patterns across the hardwood floors. For a moment, I allowed myself to simply absorb the beauty, these small details of my home that had offered silent comfort during 15 years of calculated deception. Today, that deception would end, not with a whisper, but with the controlled explosion of a carefully planned revelation. My phone buzzed promptly at 5:30 a.m., Sarah Winters calling to confirm the day's choreography. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said, her voice brisk with the energy of someone who'd already been working for hours. "The Globe has the exclusive locked and loaded. I just received their final draft for approval." "And?" I asked, moving to my hidden closet to select the outfit I'd chosen for today's transformation. "It's perfect. Respectful but thorough. They're positioning it as the return of a financial powerhouse rather than a scandalous revelation." "Send it to me," I instructed, pulling out the Armani suit I'd selected, not black, which would appear vindictive, but a deep sapphire blue that conveyed authority without aggression. "I want to review it before they publish." Within minutes, the article appeared in my secure email. The headline read, "Blackwood Heiress Emerges from 15-Year Sabbatical to Reclaim Financial Empire." The piece was indeed masterfully constructed, presenting my years away from public life as a planned sabbatical to explore creative pursuits, now concluded as I stepped back into my role as the controlling force behind Blackwood Financial Group. It made no direct mention of David or our impending divorce, a calculated omission that would only heighten the impact when he discovered the truth. "Approve it," I told Sarah after reading, "and confirm the CNBC schedule." "Already done. Carr will pick you up at 10:15 for the $11 interview. Marcus will meet you at the studio." I ended the call and continued preparing. By 6:00 a.m., the Globe article would be live online. By 6:30, it would begin circulating through financial circles. By 7, other publications would follow with their own versions of the story. And somewhere in this cascade of information, David would discover that the wife he'd abandoned for a younger model, the wife whose financial resources he thought he understood completely, was actually Eleanor Blackwood, controller of assets worth billions. I dressed methodically, no longer needing to select clothes that downplayed my natural confidence. The Eleanor Reynolds who illustrated children's books favored soft fabrics, comfortable cuts, and an artistic dishevelment that David found endearingly unprofessional. Eleanor Blackwood preferred structured silhouettes, impeccable tailoring, and the subtle power communicated through fabric and fit. As I fastened a simple strand of pearls around my neck, real, unlike the convincing replicas I'd worn throughout my marriage, my phone chimed with a notification. The Boston Globe's article was live. Within seconds, my secure line began registering alerts as financial news feeds picked up the story. Blackwood Financial's stock, though privately held, influenced numerous public companies through investments and partnerships. The financial world was already calculating what my return meant for markets and portfolios. I moved to my hidden office panel, activating the secure communication system to check Protocol Icarus status. David's accounts remained frozen, with notes indicating 3 more increasingly agitated calls to customer service overnight. His most recent attempt had involved threats of legal action, an empty gesture that would soon become painfully ironic. Achui. 6:47 a.m., my personal phone lit up with a text from David. "We need to talk. Now. Call me." I set the phone aside without responding. David wasn't ready for the conversation we would eventually have. He was still operating with incomplete information, still believing he held some power in our dissolving relationship. Charlotte texted next. Media response overwhelming. Interview requests pouring in beyond approved list. How would you like to proceed? I replied. Stick to approved list only. No additional interviews today. By 7:30 a.m., my security team texted confirmation that they had established a discreet perimeter around my home. We had anticipated media attention once the story broke, but I had no intention of giving impromptu front porch statements or being photographed in unplanned moments. At 7:42 a.m., David called for the first time. I declined. He called again immediately. I declined again. Then came more texts. What the hell is going on? People are calling me about Blackwood Financial. Eleanor, answer your damn phone. Is this some kind of joke? There's a story saying you are Eleanor Blackwood? The last one made me smile. So he'd seen the initial coverage, but was still in denial. Perfect. At 8:15 a.m., my home security system alerted me to David's car approaching the house. I had anticipated this reaction and was prepared. I sent a quick text to the security team stationed discreetly. Around my property, target approaching. Standard protocol. I watched through the security camera as David pulled haphazardly into the driveway, emerging from his car with the frantic energy of a man whose world was rapidly unraveling. His normally impeccable appearance was noticeably disheveled, wrinkled shirt, uncombed hair, and an expression I'd never seen before, genuine fear. He pounded on the front door, the sound echoing through the house. "Eleanor, open the door! I know you're in there!" I remained in my office, watching through the security feed. After 2 minutes of continuous knocking, one of my security team members approached him from the street. "Mr. Reynolds," the suited man said politely but firmly. "Ms. Blackwood is preparing for scheduled media appearances and cannot be disturbed at this time." David whirled to face him. "Who the hell are you, and why are you calling her that?" "I'm with Ms. Blackwood's security team. If you have urgent business, I can pass a message to her staff." "Her staff?" David repeated incredulously. "What is this? Insanity? That's my wife." "Ex-wife in process, I believe," the security officer replied with professional detachment. "And I must ask you to leave the premises now, sir." "I'm not going anywhere until I talk to Eleanor." David moved back toward the door, but the security officer smoothly intercepted him. "Sir, you're trespassing on private property. You have 2 options. Leave voluntarily or be escorted off the grounds. Ms. Blackwood has indicated she will speak with you at an appropriate time of her choosing." I watched David's face contort with a mixture of rage, confusion, and dawning horror as the reality of his situation began to penetrate. He had come here expecting to intimidate me with his anger, to demand explanations on his terms. Instead, he couldn't even get past the front gate. After a tense moment, he backed toward his car. "This isn't over," he called out, a theatrical declaration that sounded hollow even through the security feed. "Tell her I'm going to Madison's office. She can explain everything there." As his car pulled away, I received confirmation from the security team, target departing premises. Heading east, likely to attorney's office as stated. I texted back, "Maintain monitoring. Alert me if he returns." With David temporarily managed, I returned to preparing for the day's main event, my official reemergence into public life. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Blackwood Financial Group released my official statement to all major news outlets. After 15 years pursuing creative endeavors and personal growth, I am pleased to return to active leadership of Blackwood Financial Group. The company my family built has remained strong under exceptional management during my sabbatical, and I look forward to guiding its continued evolution in a changing financial landscape. I am grateful for the privacy afforded me during my time away, and appreciate the warm welcome as I step back into this role. The statement was deliberately vague about why I had stepped away, focusing instead on the strength of the company and its future. Let the speculation begin. It would only increase interest in my CNBC interview. At 9:47 a.m., Diane called with an update on David's movements. "He's at Madison Clark's office, as predicted," she reported. "He arrived approximately 20 minutes ago in a highly agitated state. Madison was unprepared for his visit and for the news breaking about your identity." "Has she reached out to us?" I asked, applying a final touch of makeup, subtle but camera-ready. "Yes." Her office called, requesting an emergency meeting between clients and counsel. Standard protocol when blindsided by a major disclosure that affects ongoing litigation. "And your response?" "That you're unavailable until tomorrow at the earliest due to prior commitments, but that our legal team would be happy to provide documentation establishing the legitimate and long-standing nature of your identity and assets." Smiled at my reflection, approving both my appearance and Diane's handling of the situation. "Perfect. Keep me updated on any significant developments." At 10:15 precisely, a discreet black Maybach pulled up to my private garage entrance, bypassing the small cluster of reporters who had gathered at the front of the property. I entered the vehicle without being spotted, my security team having established a seamless protective bubble around my movements. "Good morning, Ms. Blackwood," my driver said, using my true name with a comfort that felt strangely validating after years of being called Mrs. Reynolds. "Mr. Chen will meet you at the side entrance to the studio. Traffic is light. We should arrive with 15 minutes to spare." "Thank you, James." I settled into the leather seat, opening my portfolio to review speaking points for the interview. This would be my first public appearance as myself in 15 years, and I intended to make it flawless. The car moved smoothly through Boston's morning traffic. Through the privacy glass, I could see the city I'd lived in for decades, the same streets, buildings, and landmarks I'd passed countless times as Eleanor Reynolds. Yet today, everything looked different, sharper somehow, as if I were seeing it through new eyes. In a way, I was. For 15 years, I'd viewed Boston through the carefully maintained lens of my alternative identity. Today, I was seeing it as myself again, as the woman whose family name graced buildings, charitable foundations, and financial institutions throughout the city. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, CNBC producers ecstatic. "Viewership projections for your segment highest in months. Financial sector on high alert awaiting your comments." This was followed by a message from Marcus. "David, tried accessing executive floor at Blackwood Financial. Security denied entry. He claimed to be your husband and demanded to see management. Situation contained. But he's growing increasingly desperate." I wasn't surprised. David would be frantically trying to understand the situation, to reassert some control over a narrative that was rapidly spiraling beyond his comprehension. His fundamental understanding of our relationship, of who I was, had been completely upended, and he had not yet had time to process the implications. Those implications would become increasingly clear as the day progressed. The car pulled into the private entrance of the CNBC studio complex, where Marcus was waiting as promised. He opened my door with the faintest hint of a smile. "Welcome back to public life, Eleanor." I stepped out, straightening my jacket. "It feels strange, yet familiar, like putting on an old favorite coat after years in storage." "You never really left," he reminded me as we walked toward the entrance. "You just operated from behind a different curtain." Inside, we were escorted to a private preparation room where a production assistant reviewed the segment schedule while a makeup artist made minor adjustments to ensure I was camera-ready. "We'll start with the basics," the producer explained. "Your return to active management, the performance of Blackwood Financial during your absence, and your vision for the future. The anchor has been instructed that personal questions are off-limits for this initial interview." "Appreciated," I replied, though I had been prepared for personal inquiries. Those would come later, in controlled environments of my choosing. At precisely 11 a.m., I was escorted onto the set. The anchor, Christopher Mills, rose to greet me, a courtesy I knew he didn't extend to all guests. "Ms. Blackwood," he said warmly, shaking my hand. It's an honor to have you on the program. Your return to the financial world is the only story anyone's talking about today. The honor is mine, Christopher, I replied, taking my seat with practiced ease. It's good to be back. The red light on camera 1 illuminated, and Christopher turned to face it with professional precision. Good morning. Today, we're privileged to bring you an exclusive interview with Eleanor Blackwood, the controlling shareholder of Blackwood Financial Group, who has returned to active leadership after a 15-year sabbatical. Ms. Blackwood, welcome to the program. Thank you for having me, Christopher. Let's start with the question everyone is asking. Why now? After 15 years away from public financial life, what prompted your return to active leadership of Blackwood Financial? I smiled, the camera capturing the confident poise I'd carefully cultivated in preparation for this moment. Timing is everything in finance, as you know. I stepped away 15 years ago to explore other interests and to allow our exceptional management team room to innovate. During that time, I remained actively involved behind the scenes while pursuing creative endeavors that brought me personal fulfillment. The decision to step back into public leadership now reflects both personal timing and strategic opportunity as we enter what promises to be a transformative period in global finance. The interview proceeded smoothly, with Christopher asking informed questions about market strategy, investment philosophy, and future directions for Blackwood Financial. I answered each with the authority and insight of someone who had never truly stepped away from the financial world despite appearances. As the segment concluded, Christopher made one final observation. You're returning to public financial life as Eleanor Blackwood, but many Bostonians know you as Eleanor Reynolds, children's book illustrator. Will you continue your creative work alongside your financial leadership? This was as close as he would come to the personal questions that had been declared off-limits, a subtle nod to the dichotomy that had defined my life for 15 years. My creative work has brought me tremendous joy, I replied carefully. Those who love the books need not worry, there are more illustrations to come. But my primary focus now returns to Blackwood Financial and the responsibilities I've always held there, even when they weren't visible to the public eye. As the camera light dimmed, Christopher leaned forward. Off the record, that was masterful. The financial blogs are already exploding with analysis of everything you said, and didn't say. Thank you, Christopher. I expect I'll be seeing you again soon. Marcus met me as I exited the set. Perfect execution, he murmured as we walked toward the exit. The markets are already responding. Our partners are up across the board. And the other situation? I asked quietly. Escalating as expected. David has been to his bank, his attorney's office, and made 3 attempts to contact Blackwood Financial executives. He's currently at the Four Seasons bar, apparently on his 4th scotch, according to our monitoring team. I nodded, unsurprised. And Jessica? Left the condo they'd leased together approximately 90 minutes ago with 2 suitcases. Location currently unknown, but her credit card was just used for a hotel booking in Cambridge. So Jessica was already distancing herself from the unfolding disaster. Smart woman, or at least pragmatic. As we exited the studio, my phone vibrated with an incoming call from an unlisted number. Given the timing, it could only be one person. I answered, putting it on speaker so Marcus could hear. Hello, David. What the fuck have you done? His voice was thick with alcohol and rage, the careful facade of civility completely abandoned. I've reclaimed my identity, I replied calmly. Nothing more, nothing less. Bullshit. You've frozen my accounts, humiliated me publicly, and destroyed my reputation. Everyone at the firm is talking about how I left Eleanor fucking Blackwood for a paralegal. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? I let the question hang for a moment, considering my response carefully. I've done nothing to you, David. I simply stopped pretending to be less than I am. Everything else, the accounts, your reputation, your relationship challenges, Those are natural consequences of your own decisions. Natural consequences? He sputtered. There's nothing natural about discovering your wife of 15 years has been lying about everything, that she's some kind of billionaire playing house. Marcus raised an eyebrow at this characterization, but I remained composed. I never lied about who I was, David. I simply didn't volunteer information you never asked about. You assumed I was financially naive because it suited your ego. You assumed my illustration work was a cute hobby rather than a genuine passion. You assumed a great many things, and I allowed those assumptions to stand uncorrected. This is insane, he muttered, and I could picture him running his hand through his hair, a gesture he always made when overwhelmed. The money, Eleanor. What happened to our money? Your access to certain financial accounts has been temporarily restricted due to suspicious activity patterns, I replied, using the exact language from the notification he would have received. As I'm sure the security team explained, this is standard protocol when unusual withdrawals are detected. Cut the crap! You did this! Those accounts were never joint accounts in the legal sense, David. They were Blackwood financial products with specific conditional access parameters. Parameters clearly outlined in the documentation you signed when we established them. Documentation? I signed, he repeated incredulously. When did I ever sign anything related to Blackwood Financial? Year 3 of our marriage, I replied precisely. You signed numerous financial documents I presented while we restructured our estate planning. You declared the paperwork boring, admin stuff, and signed where indicated without reading the details. One of those documents established the conditional access protocols now being enforced. The silence on the other end was profound. You set me up, he finally said, his voice low with dawning comprehension. You planned for this even back then. I planned for contingencies, I corrected. As any prudent financial manager would. Another long pause. When he spoke again, his tone had changed, the anger giving way to something more calculating. So, what happens now? You've had your revenge. You've humiliated me. What do you want? I sipped my scotch, considering this framing. Neither was entirely accurate, yet both contained elements of truth. I had loved David once, and while I hadn't planned our marriage's dissolution as revenge, I couldn't deny the satisfaction I felt at reclaiming my true identity after years of deliberate diminishment. What's our monitoring showing about David's current status? I asked. Charlotte consulted another screen. He left the Four Seasons bar approximately 2 hours ago, returned briefly to the condo he'd leased with Jessica, then left again. He's currently at the Liberty Hotel bar, on his second drink. His credit card was temporarily unfrozen to allow for basic living expenses, as per protocol. The small mercy of allowing him access to limited funds had been my decision, not out of sympathy, but strategic calculation. I needed David functional for what came next. And Jessica? Still at the Cambridge Hotel. She's made several calls to a law firm specializing in celebrity privacy issues. Interesting. Jessica was more pragmatic than I'd given her credit for. Already, seeking professional guidance to navigate her unexpected proximity to a high-profile situation. Any other developments I should be aware of? Charlotte hesitated. Madison Clark has requested an emergency hearing regarding temporary financial arrangements during divorce proceedings. She's claiming financial duress on behalf of her client. Couldn't help but laugh at the audacity. David's attorney is claiming financial duress after he emptied our joint accounts 3 days ago. Yes. The filing suggests that you deliberately misrepresented your financial situation during the marriage, constituting a form of fraud that has now left her client without access to marital assets. Forward the filing to Diane. I want a comprehensive response ready by morning. After concluding the call, I wandered through my home, glass in hand, considering the strange dichotomy of my existence. For 15 years, I had lived as Eleanor Reynolds in these rooms, creating a carefully curated version of myself tailored to David's expectations and ego requirements. Yet all along, Eleanor Blackwood had existed in parallel, managing investments, guiding corporate strategy, and maintaining the financial empire my family had built, all hidden behind secure communications and occasional business trips abroad. Now those separate identities were merging back into a single, authentic self. The process was both liberating and disorienting, like stepping from a darkened room into bright sunlight. My phone chimed with an incoming text, not from my team or from David, but from an unexpected source. Jessica. I think we should talk, privately. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. I considered the possibilities this might present as I typed my response. I agree. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., my office at Blackwood Financial. Come alone. Her reply was immediate. I'll be there. I smiled, sipping my scotch as I gazed, out at the Boston skyline glittering in the darkness. David's girlfriend reaching out independently suggested fascinating new dimensions to this unfolding scenario. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges and opportunities. The continued reconstruction of my public identity, legal maneuverings in the divorce proceedings, and now this intriguing meeting with Jessica. For 15 years, I had lived reactively, adjusting my behavior to maintain David's comfortable illusions. Now I was back in control, orchestrating events rather than merely responding to them. It felt like finally breathing freely after years underwater. I sent one final message to Marcus before retiring for the night. Phase 2. Complete. Begin preparations for Phase 3 tomorrow after my 2 p.m. meeting. His response was immediate and required no elaboration. Understood. Day 1 of Eleanor Blackwood's return to public life had unfolded exactly as planned. Day 2 promised to be even more interesting as the full implications of my revelation continued to ripple outward through David's carefully constructed reality. And I intended to be fully present for every moment of the unraveling. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office at Blackwood Financial Group, illuminating a space I had designed but rarely occupied during the past 15 years. 47 floors above Boston, the view commanded the harbor, the financial district, and beyond, a fitting perspective for what the day would bring. I arrived at 7 a.m., well before the official start of business, to reacquaint myself with the physical manifestation of my professional life. The office had been maintained exactly to my specifications throughout my absence. The modern desk of polished walnut, the carefully curated art collection featuring emerging female artists, the subtle security features invisible to the casual observer. Charlotte arrived promptly at 7:30, carrying a leather portfolio and 2 cups of coffee from the artisanal shop I'd favored before my sabbatical. This isn't about revenge, David, I said, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction I felt at his profound discomfort. It's about transparency. For 15 years, I lived as someone smaller than myself to accommodate your needs. That arrangement has concluded, and the divorce will proceed according to law. However, the terms will need significant revision in light of recent disclosures. I suggest you consult with Madison about scheduling a proper meeting with my legal team next week. Next. Week? He repeated incredulously. What am I supposed to do until then? I can't access any money. I believe the initial account security hold lasts 3 to 5 business days, according to standard protocols, I replied, knowing full well that those protocols were entirely of my design. As for immediate expenses, perhaps Jessica might help? She seemed quite comfortable spending the money you took from our accounts before they were restricted. Jessica's gone, he admitted, his voice suddenly empty. Checked into some hotel. Says she needs space to process. Of course she did. Jessica hadn't signed up for this level of complication. She'd expected a comfortable lifestyle subsidized by a successful financial advisor, not a public scandal involving one of Boston's wealthiest families. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. Not sorry at all. I'm afraid I need to go. I have a board meeting in 30 minutes. Eleanor, wait! His voice held a new note of desperation. I still don't understand why. Why live a lie for 15 years? Why marry me at all if you were this? It was a fair question. Perhaps the only one he'd asked that deserved a thoughtful answer. I married you because I loved you, David. After my father died, I was adrift. You seemed grounded, normal, uninterested in my family's wealth. It was refreshing. But then I discovered you needed to feel superior. Financially, intellectually. You needed me to be less so you could feel like more. That's not true, he protested weakly. It is, though. Remember when I suggested a different approach to the Thompson account, and you laughed it off as cute that I thought I understood finance? That strategy you dismissed would have increased returns by 22%, by the way. He was silent. Or when you explained basic investment concepts to me at dinner parties while your colleagues smiled indulgently at your patient tutelage of your artsy wife. Meanwhile, I was managing billions through structures you never bothered to investigate. How? Was I supposed to know? He asked bitterly. You deliberately misled me? No, David. I revealed exactly as much of myself as you were interested in seeing. You never once asked about my family beyond the superficial. You never questioned how I afforded this house before we married. You never wondered why my little books afforded us such comfortable vacations. You saw what you wanted to see. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 15 years of unspoken truths. We'll speak again next week, David, with our respective legal teams present. I ended the call before he could respond. Marcus, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, gave me a measured look. That went about as expected. Yes, I agreed. Now, let's prepare for the board meeting. I believe we have actual business to attend to. The remainder of the day unfolded with the precision of a Swiss watch. The board meeting, my first in-person appearance in the Blackwood Financial boardroom in 15 years, was a surprisingly emotional experience. Several long-standing board members who had known my father embraced me with genuine warmth, while newer members regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and respect. I outlined my vision for the company's future, emphasizing continuity with the successful strategies developed during my sabbatical, while introducing new initiatives focused on technological innovation and sustainable investment. As evening approached, I returned to my Beacon Hill home, now secured by an expanded security team. Inside, the house felt different, no longer a stage set for my performance as Eleanor Reynolds, but truly mine, in a way it hadn't been for 15 years. I poured myself a glass of the Macallan 25, a scotch David had never known I enjoyed, believing I preferred only sweet white wines, and reviewed the day's developments with Charlotte via secure video call. The media coverage has been overwhelmingly positive, she reported. Financial analysts are predicting a strong positive impact on our portfolio companies based on your CNBC interview. Social media is divided between financial commentary and more personal speculation. About David? Primarily. The society blogs have picked up the angle that Boston's hidden billionaire was married to a financial advisor who never knew her true worth. It's being framed as either the greatest love story or the most elaborate revenge plot, depending on which site you read. Your preferences haven't changed, I hope? She asked, setting one cup on my desk. Some things remain constant, I replied, inhaling the familiar aroma. What's our first order of business? Diane sent over Madison Clark's emergency petition. She handed me a document from her portfolio. It's creative, I'll give her that. She's claiming you committed fraud by concealing your true financial status during the marriage, thereby inducing David to make financial decisions he might not have made had he known the truth. I scanned the document, noting Madison's careful wording. She was attempting to position David as a victim of deception rather than an opportunist who had emptied shared accounts before abandoning his marriage. Interesting approach, I noted. And Diane's response? Already filed. She's countered that no fraud occurred because you never misrepresented your identity. David simply never asked the right questions. Moreover, she's documented that David did sign acknowledgement of your family connections during your prenuptial agreement, even if he never explored what those connections meant. That had been one of my earliest protective measures, ensuring the prenuptial agreement included references to my family interests in Blackwood Enterprises. David had signed without question, apparently assuming these were minor holdings of little consequence. What about the frozen accounts? Diane has evidence that David initiated transfers of all funds to accounts in his name only, contrary to Massachusetts's communal property conventions during divorce proceedings. She's positioning the security holds as standard fraud prevention, measures that any financial institution might implement. I smiled. Diane's legal strategy was elegant in its simplicity, using David's own actions against him while presenting my response as routine financial security protocols rather than calculated. Retribution. What's on the schedule before my 2 p.m. meeting with Jessica? Charlotte consulted her tablet. Executive committee at 9:00, PR strategy session at 11:00, and lunch with the board chairman at 12:30. Your afternoon is clear after the Jessica meeting in anticipation of potential follow-up actions. Perfect. And what's our latest intelligence on David's movements? She tapped her screen. He spent the night at the Liberty Hotel, checked out at 6:45 a.m., and is currently at Madison Clark's office. Based on his digital calendar, they're preparing for an emergency hearing scheduled for 10 a.m. Ambitious, I noted. The courts don't typically move that quickly. Apparently, Madison has connections in the family court system. Judge Wilson agreed to hear their petition this morning. Good, I said, surprising Charlotte. The sooner this particular legal maneuver is shut down, the better. Is Diane prepared? Fully. She'll be representing our interests at the hearing. I spent the next hour reviewing company performance data from the past quarter. Impressive numbers that validated the management structure I'd put in place during my public absence. Blackwood Financial had not merely survived without my visible leadership. It had thrived, growing its managed assets by 18% annually for 15 consecutive years. The executive committee meeting at 9:00 was a welcome homecoming. Unlike the board, which included outside directors, the executive committee consisted of my most trusted team members, people who had helped maintain the illusion of my sabbatical, while enabling my continued guidance from behind the scenes. The market response to your return has been overwhelmingly positive, reported Vivian Zhang, our chief investment officer. Our major holdings saw an average 4.3% increase yesterday. Analysts are speculating about potential new directions under your renewed public leadership. Let them speculate for now, I replied. We'll announce our 5-year strategy at the quarterly earnings call. In the meantime, I want a complete review of our portfolio companies, particularly those where David had any advisory involvement. Through his firm. Robert Daltrey raised an eyebrow. Do we anticipate issues? Not necessarily, but I want absolute certainty that there are no surprises waiting. David advised several clients with connections to our subsidiaries. I need to know if any conflicts exist that might emerge during divorce proceedings. The meeting continued with updates from each division, suggestions for immediate priorities, and discussion of pending acquisitions. It felt natural to be physically present in these discussions after years of participating remotely or through proxies. At 10:47, Diane called from the courthouse. Judge Wilson dismissed their emergency petition, she reported, satisfaction evident in her voice. He was not amused by Madison's attempts to frame this as fraud. His exact words were, "Failure to inquire does not constitute deception on the part of the respondent." Did he address the frozen accounts? Yes. He determined that as the accounts were demonstrably Blackwood Financial products with specific security protocols that David had acknowledged in writing, the temporary holds were reasonable following unusual withdrawal patterns. Excellent. What was David's reaction? Not positive. Diane replied diplomatically. He had to be cautioned by the bailiff about his language. Madison is requesting a full financial disclosure hearing next week, which the judge granted. We'll need complete documentation of all your holdings by Monday. Already in progress, I assured her. Charlotte will coordinate with your team. The PR strategy session at 11:00 focused on managing the intensifying media interest in my story. Despite our careful framing of my reemergence as a planned return following a creative sabbatical, the personal elements were gaining traction in both financial and mainstream press. We've received interview requests from every major network and publication, Sarah reported. Everyone wants the human interest angle, the billionaire who lived as a children's book illustrator, the husband who never knew his wife's true worth. Stay focused on the business narrative, I instructed. One additional CNBC interview this week, emphasizing Blackwood Financial's performance and future strategy. Wall Street Journal for print. No personal profiles yet. And questions about David and the divorce? Standard response. Ms. Blackwood confirms her marriage is ending, but considers this a private matter. Her focus remains on her return to active leadership of Blackwood Financial Group. Sarah nodded. What about the children's books? There's tremendous interest in that aspect of your life, especially from women's magazines and parenting publications. This gave me pause. My work as an illustrator had begun as part of my cover identity, but had evolved into a genuine passion. Unlike my marriage, my creative career was something I intended to maintain. I'll do one and only one interview specifically about the books, I decided. With Parents Magazine, they've always given thoughtful coverage to my work without sensationalism. Lunch with Harold Winston, our board chairman and my father's oldest friend, was both professional and personal. At 82, Harold remained sharp as ever, his insights on corporate governance tempered by decades of experience. You've orchestrated your return masterfully, Eleanor, he said as we enjoyed our meal in my private dining room. Though I admit, I'm still curious about why you maintained the charade for so long. Your father would have been dismayed to see you diminish yourself for any man. It wasn't just about David, I admitted. After Dad died, I needed space from being Eleanor Blackwood. The expectations, the constant scrutiny, the endless parade of fortune hunters. Being Eleanor Reynolds gave me room to breathe, to grieve, to figure out who I was beyond the Blackwood name and fortune. Harold nodded thoughtfully. And did you? Figure it out? I discovered I'm both women, the strategic financial mind my father cultivated and the creative spirit my mother encouraged. I don't need to choose between them. Well said. He raised his water glass in a small toast. To reintegration, then, and to your father, who would be proud of the empire you've built in his absence. At 1:45 p.m., Charlotte informed me that Jessica had arrived in the building and was being escorted to the private conference room adjacent to my office. I took a moment to compose myself, curious about what David's girlfriend might want from this meeting. The Jessica who waited in my conference room was not the polished paralegal from David's firm photos. This woman appeared stressed, her designer outfit slightly rumpled, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She stood as I entered, extending her hand with professional composure despite her obvious discomfort. Ms. Blackwood, thank you for agreeing to meet. Please sit, I gestured to the chair across from mine at the small conference table. I admit I'm intrigued by your request. Jessica settled into the chair, setting her handbag aside with deliberate movements that suggested she was gathering courage. I imagine you must hate me, she began directly. I don't hate you, Jessica, I replied truthfully. I don't know you well enough to form such a strong opinion. She blinked, apparently surprised by my candor. I didn't know about you, about who you really are, until yesterday. David told me you were just a children's book illustrator. I'm a children's book illustrator, I corrected gently. Among other things. Yes, well. She clasped her hands on the table. This is awkward, but I need to clear something up. I didn't know David was planning to take your savings when he left. He told me your finances were already separated, that everything was mutually agreed upon. This was unexpected. Not Jessica's presence, which I had anticipated might offer strategic advantages, but her apparent desire to distance herself from David's financial maneuvers. Why tell me this now? I asked. Because I don't want to be portrayed as some gold digger who helped a man steal from his wife, she replied bluntly. When I saw the news about who you really are, I realized how this looks. I needed you to know I wasn't part of that decision. I studied her carefully, looking for signs of deception. Finding none, I nodded slowly. I appreciate your candor. What exactly did David tell you about our separation? Jessica shifted uncomfortably. He said you'd grown apart, that you were more interested in your books than your marriage, and that you'd both agreed to an amicable division of assets. He specifically told me your family home was yours to keep, while the liquid assets were primarily his from his career earnings. I see. The picture was becoming clearer. David had misrepresented our situation to Jessica just as thoroughly as I had supposedly misrepresented myself to him. And when did your relationship begin? Her cheeks flushed slightly. 8 months ago, it wasn't planned. We were working late on a client case and, well, you can imagine the rest. 8 months. So David's affair had been ongoing for nearly a year. Information that would be useful in divorce proceedings. What do you want from this meeting, Jessica? Beyond clearing your name? She took a deep breath. I need to protect my professional reputation. I'm a third-year associate at Clark, Winterton & Hayes with partnership aspirations. Being known as the paralegal who helped a financial advisor steal from Eleanor Blackwood would end my career before it truly begins. Ah, self-interest. Now, we were getting to the real motivation. And what would you offer in exchange for such protection? Her eyes met mine directly. Information. About David's financial dealings over the past year. Things I've observed that didn't make sense at the time but might interest you now. This was unexpected and potentially valuable. Such as, he's been moving money around strangely. Settings. Up new accounts, transferring funds between them. When I asked about it, he said it was normal tax planning, but it seemed excessive. And he's been meeting with clients outside normal channels. No documentation, no firm calendar entries. Interest was piqued. This aligned with concerns I'd privately harbored about David's financial activities, but had never been able to confirm due to my need to maintain my cover. Do you have documentation of these movements? She reached into her handbag and withdrew. A thumb drive. Everything I could access without breaking client confidentiality laws, account numbers, dates, patterns. I'm not providing specific client information, but there's enough here to establish a timeline of unusual activity. I made no move to take the drive. Why would you betray David's confidence this way? Jessica's expression hardened slightly. When I checked into the hotel yesterday, he called me 6 times, not to make sure I was okay, but to ask if I could loan him money since his accounts were frozen. When I declined, he suggested I should earn my keep by using my firm connections. To help him fight you. That was illuminating. I couldn't help but smile at David's predictable self-interest. Even in crisis, his primary concern was his own comfort, rather than the woman he'd claimed to love. What do you hope to achieve with this information sharing? A clean break, Jessica replied firmly. I want no part of this divorce battle. I want my name kept out of public statements and legal filings to the extent possible. I want to return to my career without the shadow of this situation hanging over me. It was a reasonable request, one that potentially benefited both of us. Jessica would escape the scandal relatively unscathed, and I would gain valuable intelligence on David's financial activities. If your information proves substantive, I believe we can come to an arrangement, I said, finally taking the thumb drive. My legal team will review this material. Assuming it contains what you claim, I see no reason why your name would need to feature prominently in divorce proceedings. Relief washed over Jessica's features. Thank you. There's one more thing you should know. She hesitated. Go on. David's been talking to writers, specifically someone at Boston Magazine. He was planning some kind of profile piece about his financial advisory practice. Now that this has happened, I'm concerned he might try to tell his side of the story publicly. This was valuable intelligence indeed. David attempting to control the narrative through media would require proactive countermeasures. When did these conversations begin? About 3 weeks ago, before he left you, but after he'd been planning it for some time. As evening approached, I received another update from the monitoring team. Target has been drinking heavily at Commonwealth Hotel Bar, has made multiple calls to Boston Magazine editor, attempted to withdraw cash from ATM with 3 different cards, all declined. David was growing increasingly desperate, exactly as anticipated. With his accounts frozen, his girlfriend gone, and his comfortable new life evaporating, he was reaching for his last perceived leverage, the threat of negative publicity. He texted Marcus, accelerate phase 3. David likely to attempt media counter-narrative. Need to secure all documentation from his office and electronic systems before he returns tomorrow. Phase 3 had originally been scheduled to begin next week, a careful auditing of David's professional practice to ensure no Blackwood financial clients had been affected by his advice. Now, with evidence of potential financial impropriety, the timeline needed advancement. Marcus's response came quickly. Team mobilizing now. Legal warrants being prepared based on preliminary evidence. Will execute at first light. I stood at my office window, watching darkness fall over Boston. The city lights reflected on the harbor waters, a glittering tapestry of activity continuing regardless of personal dramas. Somewhere in that landscape, David was drowning his sorrows and plotting what he believed would be his comeback, unaware that his professional destruction was being methodically arranged alongside the dissolution of our marriage. My phone rang. David. Again, his 7th call in the past hour. This time I decided to answer. Hello, David. Finally. His voice was slurred, the sound of ambient bar noise in the background. You can't keep ignoring me, Eleanor. This isn't going to go away. I'm not trying to make it go away, I replied calmly. I'm simply proceeding according to proper legal protocols. Legal protocols, he scoffed. Is that what you call freezing all my accounts? Humiliating me publicly? Destroying everything I've built? I haven't destroyed anything, David. Your accounts are subject to standard security holds following suspicious withdrawal patterns, holds you agreed to when signing the account documents. As for public humiliation, I've made no public comment about our marriage or its dissolution. Cut the crap, he slurred. You know exactly what you're doing. You planned all this. You trapped me. There was a certain irony in his accusation. The man who had systematically deceived his clients now outraged at perceiving himself deceived. What do you want from this call, David? I have a busy evening ahead. I want my money, he shouted, loud enough that I heard concerned murmurs in the background of wherever he was drinking. I want what I'm entitled to as your husband of 15 years. What you're legally entitled to will be determined through proper divorce proceedings, I replied evenly. Your attorney can continue that discussion with mine next week. Next week? He laughed bitterly. You think I'm waiting until next week? I'm talking to Boston Magazine tomorrow. Full interview. The truth about Eleanor Blackwood and how she deceived me for 15 years. How do you think that'll play with your fancy board members? I allowed a moment of silence before responding. I think before you give that interview, you should consider your own professional vulnerabilities very carefully, David. His laughter stopped abruptly. What's that supposed to mean? It means that glass houses and stones are a dangerous combination. particularly for someone with fiduciary responsibilities to clients. The silence that followed told me he understood my implication perfectly. "You're bluffing," he finally said, but his voice had lost its belligerent certainty. "You don't know anything about my practice, don't I? The Thompson account, the Westerly Foundation, the Miller Family Trust. Shall I continue?" Each name I mentioned represented a client account Jessica's data had flagged for irregular transactions. "Those are confidential client relationships," he said stiffly. "You have no right." "I have every right to protect Blackwood Financial's interests," I interrupted. "Several of those clients have investment relationships with our subsidiaries. Any impropriety affecting their accounts is very much my concern." Another long silence. I could almost hear him calculating, reassessing his position in light of this new information. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice now sober despite the alcohol. "I want a civilized divorce conducted through proper legal channels. I want discretion regarding our personal matters, and I want absolute certainty that no clients have been harmed through any association with our marriage. And if I agree to those terms, then perhaps the account security holds might be reviewed on an expedited basis. Perhaps certain irregularities in client account management might be addressed privately rather than through regulatory channels." The timing was significant, suggesting David had been preparing his exit strategy with particular care, including image management. "Thank you for this information, Jessica. It will be taken into account." She stood, apparently sensing the meeting, was concluding. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about all of this. If I'd known who you really were, you wouldn't have become involved with my husband?" I finished for her. She had the grace to look embarrassed. "That sounds terrible when you say it that way." "But accurate," I observed without rancor. "No, need to apologize for pragmatism. I understand it better than most." As Jessica departed, escorted by security to ensure she left the building without detours, I connected the thumb drive to my secure terminal. A preliminary scan confirmed its contents matched her description: documentation of unusual account movements, calendar entries, notes from meetings. I immediately forwarded the drive to our financial forensics team with highest priority flags. If David had been engaging in questionable financial practices, this information could prove pivotal in the divorce proceedings, and potentially beyond. Charlotte entered as I was reviewing the initial data. "Jessica has left the building. How did it go?" "Productively," I replied. "She's provided what appears to be evidence of financial irregularities in David's practice. Have Marcus assemble the forensic team immediately. I want preliminary analysis by end of day." "Already done. They're waiting in the secure conference room on 45. Charlotte hesitated, then added, "David has made 17 attempts to contact you since this morning. His most recent messages suggest he's prepared to tell his side of the story if you don't unfreeze his accounts immediately. Jessica mentioned he's been talking to Boston Magazine. Alert our media team to prepare contingencies for potential negative press, and have Sarah reach out to her contacts at the magazine. I want to know exactly what David's been discussing with them." As Charlotte departed to execute these directives, I took a moment to consider the rapidly evolving situation. Jessica's unexpected alliance, motivated though it was by self-interest, had potentially accelerated my timeline. If David had, indeed, been engaged in questionable financial activities, the divorce proceedings might soon be the least of his concerns. I sent a message to Diane. Possible financial improprieties uncovered. Forensic team analyzing now. May affect divorce strategy substantially. Meet tomorrow, 8 a.m.? Her response was immediate, confirmed. If substantiated, we shift from defensive to offensive posture. Exactly what I had been thinking. The narrative was changing from billionaire heiress conceals wealth from husband to financial advisor engages in questionable practices while betraying wife. A much more advantageous position for both legal proceedings and public perception. spent the next 2 hours with the forensic accounting team, reviewing Jessica's data alongside Blackwood Financial's extensive resources. The picture that emerged was troubling. Even with our preliminary analysis, clear patterns of irregular financial management became apparent in David's client accounts. "He's been using a technique called skimming the cream," explained Rajiv. Mehta, our head of forensic accounting. Small amounts diverted from large transactions, typically during market volatility when clients are less likely to notice minor discrepancies in their returns. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "Based on the transaction patterns, approximately 14 months. It accelerated significantly 8 months ago, coinciding exactly with the beginning of his relationship with Jessica." David had been funding his new lifestyle by skimming from client accounts, a profound breach of fiduciary duty and potentially criminal behavior. "Quantify the extent," I requested. Rajiv consulted his notes. "Preliminary estimate suggests approximately $340,000 diverted across multiple accounts, not enough to trigger automatic audits at any single client, but cumulatively significant." "And traceable?" "Absolutely. The methodology was clever, but not sophisticated enough to withstand proper forensic investigation. We can document the full trail with another day's work." I considered the implications carefully. This information transformed the dynamic entirely. David was no longer merely a husband who had left his wife and taken their savings. He was potentially a financial advisor who had violated his professional ethics and possibly the law. "I want absolute confirmation before we proceed," I instructed. "No suppositions, no extrapolations. Hard evidence only." "Understood," Rajiv nodded. "We'll have comprehensive documentation by tomorrow morning." The offer was clear. Behave appropriately in the divorce, and I might refrain from pursuing the full implications of his financial misconduct. "I need to think," he muttered, the fight suddenly gone from his voice. "Take tonight," I advised. "But understand this, David. If you speak to Boston Magazine or any other publication about me, about our marriage, or about Blackwood Financial, the full documentation of every irregular transaction associated with your practice will be in the hands of regulatory authorities by noon the same day." I ended the call without waiting for his response. The threat had been delivered. Now David would have to decide which he valued more, revenge or freedom. Charlotte appeared at my office door. "The car is ready whenever you'd like to head home." "Thank you." "You," I replied, gathering my things. "Has the security team completed their sweep of the house?" She nodded. "All clear. Additional personnel will remain stationed overnight as a precaution." "Good. I expect tomorrow may be eventful." As my car navigated the evening traffic back to Beacon Hill, I reflected on the rapid evolution of events. What had begun as a controlled revelation of my true identity had escalated into potential exposure of criminal financial misconduct. The divorce that David had initiated thinking he was leaving a financially naive children's book illustrator had transformed into a high-stakes battle he was utterly unprepared to fight. My phone chimed with a final update from Marcus. "All preparations. Complete for morning operation. Legal team standing by. Regulatory contacts briefed off record. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of Phase 3, no longer simply about reclaiming my identity, but potentially about ending David's career." The scale of consequences had expanded dramatically, yet I felt no hesitation. David had made his choices to betray our marriage, to take what he believed was our joint savings, and most damning to betray the trust of his clients. Now he would face the consequences of those choices with the full force of Blackwood Financial's resources aligned against him. As my car pulled into the private drive of my Beacon Hill home, I felt a surprising sense of calm. Tomorrow would bring chaos for David, but for me, it would bring the next methodical step in dismantling the elaborate deception that had defined the past 15 years. The endgame was approaching, not just for my marriage, but for the entire false reality David had constructed around himself. and I was finally fully prepared to witness its collapse. Dawn broke over Boston with the crisp clarity of early autumn, painting the harbor in shades of gold and amber. I'd been awake for hours, reviewing the final documentation from our forensic team while waiting for confirmation that Phase 3 had been initiated. The evidence against David was damning and comprehensive. Rajiv's team had worked through the night, tracing every irregular transaction Jessica had flagged. The pattern was unmistakable. Small amounts systematically diverted from client accounts during periods of market volatility, transferred through a series of increasingly obscure channels, ultimately consolidating in offshore accounts under shell company names. Amateur work, really. The kind of financial misconduct that inevitably leaves traceable patterns that might have remained hidden from his clients but stood out like neon signage to Blackwood Financial's forensic specialists. My secure phone chimed at precisely 6:30 a.m., Marcus calling with the morning's first update. "Teams in position," he reported without preamble. "Legal warrants secured based on the preliminary evidence. SEC liaison briefed informally. We're waiting for your final authorization." I took a moment to consider the gravity of what I was about to initiate. This went beyond divorce proceedings or personal retribution. What our investigation had uncovered was criminal activity, a breach of fiduciary duty that had harmed innocent clients who trusted David with their financial security. "Execute," I said simply. 20 minutes later, my regular phone rang. David calling, his voice tight with panic. "There are people at my office, Eleanor. People with warrants. What have you done?" "Good morning, David," I replied calmly. "I've done exactly what I warned you about last night. Protected the interests of clients potentially harmed by irregular financial management." "This is insane. You can't just send investigators into my private practice." "I haven't sent anyone," I corrected him. "Those are regulatory officials executing legally obtained warrants based on credible evidence of financial misconduct. Blackwood Financial is merely cooperating with authorities as required by law." "Bullshit," he shouted, panic giving way to, This is your doing. You've manufactured this whole thing to punish me." "The transactions speak for themselves, David. $340,000 diverted from client accounts over 14 months, particularly accelerating right around the time your relationship with Jessica began. Coincidental timing, don't you think?" His sharp intake of breath confirmed what I already knew, guilty recognition. "You think you've won," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "You think you've got me cornered, but you've forgotten something crucial, Eleanor." "And what might that be?" "I've been your husband for 15 years. I know things about you, about your family, about Blackwood operations. That would make fascinating reading for the financial press. Or perhaps for regulatory officials examining Blackwood's own practices." So he was attempting blackmail now. A desperate final gambit. "What exactly do you think you know, David?" I asked mildly. "The Swiss accounts, the Cayman holdings, the way your father structured certain acquisitions in the 90s. You think Blackwood Financial can withstand that kind of scrutiny?" I couldn't help but smile at his misplaced confidence. "You're bluffing, David. You have no access to Blackwood's private financial structures. Any information you think you have is either publicly available or fundamentally misunderstood." "Am I bluffing?" "You moved in familiar circles, Eleanor. People talk, especially when they think they're impressing a financial advisor. I've collected quite a file over the years. Insurance, I called it." This was unexpected. Not that David might have gathered information, but that he believed it valuable enough to use as leverage. It suggested either dangerous knowledge or dangerous delusion. Either way, it required neutralization. "Bring your file to Madison's office at noon," I proposed. "Have her review your evidence. If she believes it constitutes legitimate leverage, we can discuss terms." The suggestion seemed to catch him off guard. Fine, noon. Madison's office. I'll have Diane meet you there." After ending the call, I immediately contacted Marcus. David claims to have compromising information about Blackwood operations. Likely bluffing, but we need to identify any potential vulnerabilities immediately. Understood. What's your assessment of the actual risk? Low to moderate, I replied. Honestly, David attended social functions with Blackwood associates, but was never privy to operational details. However, he may have picked up gossip or misinterpreted legitimate business practices as something nefarious. I'll have the security team compile a list of all Blackwood gatherings he attended and who was present. If there were any indiscreet conversations, we'll identify them. Good. And accelerate the SEC involvement. If David is planning some kind of counterattack using alleged Blackwood improprieties, I want him thoroughly discredited before he can make any public claims. By 9 a.m., reports were flowing in steadily from the team at David's office. Investigators had seized computers, files, and documentation. His staff had been interviewed, including several who had expressed concerns about irregular transactions but had been afraid to report them. I conducted my morning meetings as scheduled, projecting calm efficiency while the crisis management team handled the David situation. The executive committee needed reassurance that our focus remained on Blackwood Financial's future rather than my personal drama, and I provided that reassurance through detailed strategic planning discussions. At UI. 10:30, Diane called with an unexpected development. Madison Clark just contacted me, she reported. David apparently arrived at her office highly agitated, claiming to have evidence that could bring down Blackwood Financial. After reviewing his materials, Madison has requested an urgent private meeting, with you specifically, not your legal team. This was intriguing. If Madison, a seasoned attorney, was requesting direct contact rather than proceeding through normal legal channels, the situation must be more nuanced than anticipated. Did she give any indication of the nature of David's evidence? No. But her language was telling. She said, and I quote, "This situation requires careful handling by principals, not representatives." She also emphasized that she's acting in the interest of all parties. Schedule the meeting for 11:30 at neutral territory, that are a private dining room at the Bristol. And Diane, attend with me, but allow for private discussion if it appears productive. Understood, though I strongly advise against any unsupervised conversation with opposing counsel. Noted, I replied. But sometimes unconventional situations require unconventional approaches. While waiting for the meeting, I received the preliminary report from the regulatory team at David's office. The evidence was even more damning than our initial analysis had suggested. Beyond the client account skimming, they had discovered documentation of tax reporting irregularities, misleading performance reports, and communications suggesting David had been planning a more significant financial scheme involving a bogus investment fund. His entire professional life was unraveling, precisely as mine was reassembling into a coherent whole. At 11:25, I arrived at the Bristol, entering through the kitchen to avoid the main lobby where financial journalists had taken, to lingering in hopes of catching me for comments. Diane was waiting in the private dining room, reviewing documents with focused intensity. Madison just texted. "They're 5 minutes out," she reported, closing her portfolio. Based on her communication pattern, I suspect David has something that concerns her professionally. Something she'd rather address off the record before it becomes part of formal proceedings. That's my assessment as well, I agreed. Let's hear what they have to say. Madison Clark arrived precisely on time, David trailing behind her with the hangdog expression of a man whose options were rapidly diminishing. His normally immaculate appearance had deteriorated further. Unshaven, suit rumpled, eyes bloodshot from what appeared to be a combination of alcohol and panic. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Madison began formally after preliminary greetings. "I believe we have a situation that would benefit from direct and candid conversation among principals." "I'm listening," I replied, studying David's uncharacteristically subdued demeanor. Madison glanced at David, then back to me. My client has shared with me certain documents he believes contain compromising information about Blackwood Financial operations. After review, I have determined that these materials require careful consideration outside standard legal channels. What exactly has he shown you? Diane asked. Madison hesitated, clearly choosing her words with precision. Materials that, if authentic, would suggest potential regulatory concerns regarding certain historical Blackwood transactions. However, the provenance of these materials raises significant legal questions about how they were obtained. I looked directly at David. You stole documents. It wasn't a question, but he responded defensively. Not stole, collected. From conversations, from things you let slip, from materials occasionally visible in your home office. Materials you had no right to access, I noted calmly. Madison intervened smoothly. The legal status of these documents is precisely why I've requested this meeting. Regardless of how they were obtained, their existence now presents a challenge for all parties. I understood her dilemma immediately. As an officer of the court, Madison was bound by ethical obligations regarding potentially illegal evidence. Yet as David's attorney, she needed to explore any legitimate leverage he might possess. May I see these materials? I asked. Madison looked to David, who nodded reluctantly. She slid a thumb drive across the table. This contains copies of what David provided me. The originals remain secure. I handed the drive to Diane, who connected it to her secure tablet. As she scrolled through the files, her expression remained professionally neutral, but I detected subtle shifts in her posture that suggested serious concerns. After several minutes, she tilted the screen toward me, indicating specific documents for my review. What I saw was indeed troubling, not because the documents revealed actual misconduct, but because they were sophisticated forgeries of legitimate Blackwood internal communications, altered to suggest criminal financial arrangements. These are fabricated, I stated flatly. Manipulated versions of actual Blackwood documents with critical details altered. David leaned forward. Prove it. Easily, I replied. The originals are digitally authenticated in our secure database, with blockchain. Verification of every version. Your copies show clear evidence of pixel manipulation and inconsistent metadata tags. Madison's expression tightened. Mr. Reynolds, did you alter these documents? Of course not, David snapped, but his eyes slid away from hers, a tell I'd observed countless times during our marriage when he was lying. I collected them as I found them. I considered the situation carefully. David had apparently assembled fragments of legitimate information, then manipulated them to create the appearance of wrongdoing, a desperate gambit to create counter-leverage against the mounting evidence of his own misconduct. Madison, I addressed her directly, your client is currently under investigation for significant financial crimes. These fabricated documents represent an attempted diversion at best and potential additional criminal charges at worst. I assume you advised him of the legal implications of presenting falsified evidence? Madison's carefully maintained professional demeanor cracked slightly. I advised my client that any evidence presented must be authentic and legally obtained. If these documents are indeed fabricated, that would constitute a material misrepresentation to counsel. David's face flushed with anger. You're going to believe her just like that? She's been lying for 15 years about everything. Mr. Reynolds, Madison said sharply, I need you to step outside with Ms. Lacani for a moment so I can speak privately with Ms. Blackwood. After Diane escorted a protesting David from the room, Madison faced me with renewed directness. Off the record, Eleanor. Is there anything in these documents, altered or not, that presents legitimate regulatory concerns for Blackwood Financial? I appreciated her candor. Madison was attempting to determine whether her continued representation of David might involve her in a fraudulent scheme against legitimate regulatory interests. Absolutely not, I replied with equal frankness. Blackwood Financial maintains rigorous compliance protocols. The transactions referenced in these documents were all properly structured, reported, and approved by relevant authorities. David has taken fragments of legitimate operations and altered them to suggest impropriety where none exists. Madison nodded slowly. That aligns with my preliminary assessment, in which case I have significant concerns about my continued representation in this matter. You're considering withdrawing as counsel, I observed. I may have no choice. If my client has knowingly provided falsified evidence and requested I use it to negotiate on his behalf, that creates an ethical conflict I cannot navigate. I saw an opportunity for a resolution that would benefit all parties, except perhaps David. What if we could structure a settlement that removes the incentive for David to pursue this misguided strategy? I suggested. Something that provides him basic financial stability while fully protecting Blackwood interests and addressing the regulatory concerns about his practice? Madison considered this carefully. That would depend entirely on the terms and on whether the regulatory authorities already involved would consider a civil resolution sufficient. I have certain influences that could help facilitate a primarily civil resolution, I acknowledged, provided all client funds are fully restored and David accepts permanent barring from financial advisory roles. And the divorce terms? Generous? Enough to prevent destitution. Modest enough to reflect the breach of trust. No ongoing connection to Blackwood assets or operations. Complete confidentiality. Madison nodded thoughtfully. Those parameters might provide a workable framework, but you should know that David's financial situation is worse than it appears. The investigation has revealed significant personal debts beyond the client fund issues. This wasn't surprising. David had always maintained a lifestyle slightly beyond his legitimate means, a pattern that had likely contributed to his decision to begin skimming client funds. Structured payments rather than lump sum, I suggested. Managed by a trustee, to ensure appropriate use. That could work, Madison agreed. Should I bring David and Ms. Lakhani back to continue this discussion? Not yet, I replied. I'd like a moment to contact certain parties who would need to approve any regulatory compromise. While Madison stepped out to check on David, I made several rapid calls to Marcus, to our regulatory contacts, and finally to Harold Winston. Each conversation focused on the same question. Was it in Blackwood Financial's interest to facilitate a controlled resolution rather than allowing David's situation to devolve into a public spectacle? The consensus was clear. A carefully structured settlement that included full client restitution, permanent industry barring, and absolute confidentiality would best serve both justice and Blackwood's interests. When Madison returned with David and Diane, I presented the outline of a potential resolution. Here's what I'm prepared to offer. Blackwood Financial will establish a restitution fund for all affected clients, ensuring they recover every penny plus reasonable interest. In exchange for your full cooperation with investigators and acceptance of permanent barring from financial services, we'll work with authorities to focus on civil rather than criminal penalties. David started to object, but Madison silenced him with a sharp look. Regarding our divorce, I continued, you'll receive structured payments totaling $3 million over 10 years, managed by an independent trustee to ensure appropriate use. You'll sign comprehensive confidentiality agreements regarding both our marriage and any Blackwood financial matters. In return, all current account restrictions will be lifted after the settlement is finalized, and you'll receive an immediate good faith payment of $50,000 for living expenses. The amount was deliberately calculated. Generous enough to provide stability, modest enough to reflect the severity of his actions, and structured to prevent him from immediately squandering it on attempts to impress Jessica or other potential. Partners! $3 million? David scoffed. After 15 years married to a billionaire? 3 million more than you deserve given the circumstances, Diane interjected coolly, and significantly more generous than what you'd receive after a prolonged legal battle conducted in parallel with regulatory enforcement actions. Madison placed a restraining hand on David's arm. May I speak with my client privately for a moment? While they conferred in hushed tones at the far end of the room, Diane leaned toward me. This is extraordinarily generous considering his behavior. Are you certain about this approach? I'm not being generous, I clarified. I'm being strategic. A protracted legal battle would consume time and energy better directed toward Blackwood's future. This resolution provides clean closure while ensuring appropriate consequences. After several minutes, Madison and David returned to the table. His expression remained resentful, but the desperate anger had subsided into something resembling resignation. My client is willing to accept these terms in principle, Madison stated formally, contingent upon review of the complete written agreement and confirmation of the regulatory arrangements you've outlined. Have your client return all original and copied Blackwood documents in his possession as a show of good faith, Diane countered. Once verified, we'll release the initial $50,000 payment and draft the complete agreement. David's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly. Fine. Everything I have is at my apartment. I can turn it over this afternoon. Excellent, I said, rising to indicate the meeting's conclusion. Madison, Diane will coordinate with you on next steps. David, I trust this resolution will allow you to move forward with appropriate reflection on recent events. He finally met, my eyes directly, his expression a complex mixture of resentment, shame, and something approaching curiosity. One thing I don't understand, he said. Why did you do it? Live like that for 15 years when you could have had everything? It was a fair question. Perhaps the only one worth answering. I didn't live like that, I replied simply. I lived like myself, creating art I loved, maintaining connections that mattered, and building a life that had meaning beyond wealth and status. The only artificial element was allowing you to believe you understood my financial situation. Everything else was genuinely me. He shook his head slightly, clearly unable to reconcile this perspective with his worldview. All that power, all that money, and you chose to let people think you were just an illustrator. I never let people think I was just anything, David. You drew that conclusion yourself because it suited your narrative. The limitations you perceived were reflections of your own perspective, not my reality. As I departed through the kitchen exit, I felt a profound sense of closure. The final confrontation with David had been not about money or power, but about perspective. His inability to see beyond the constructs of status and financial dominance that had defined his worldview. The rest of the day unfolded with remarkable efficiency. By evening, David had surrendered all Blackwood materials in his possession. The regulatory investigation had been formally structured to prioritize civil remedies with full client restitution, and the draft settlement agreement was already circulating among legal teams. Returned to my office at Blackwood Financial for a final meeting with Marcus and the core team that had supported me through this transformation. The restitution fund is established, Marcus confirmed. All affected clients will receive full compensation plus 5% interest, a total of approximately $360,000. And David's professional status? The regulatory filing is complete. Permanent barring from all registered financial advisory roles, effective immediately. His firm's clients are being transitioned to approved advisors with clean records. I nodded, satisfied that justice had been served without unnecessary destruction. David would face significant consequences for his actions, but not the complete annihilation that might have resulted from criminal prosecution. What about the media situation? I asked Sarah, who had been monitoring press interest throughout the day. Contained, she reported. The regulatory action against David's practice is being framed as part of routine enforcement operations, unrelated to your reemergence or personal situation. We've successfully redirected media focus to Blackwood Financial's future plans and your return to leadership. And Jessica? Accepted a position with a law firm in Chicago, Charlotte interjected. Departing next week, she appears committed to maintaining distance from both David and any potential media interest in their relationship. Good, I said, feeling the last piece of this complex puzzle falling into place. I believe we can consider this chapter effectively concluded. Harold Winston, who had been quietly observing from the corner, finally spoke. Not concluded, Eleanor. Transformed. What began as a personal crisis has become a catalyst for your full reintegration into the role you were always meant to occupy. His words resonated with truth. The forced revelation of my identity, triggered by David's betrayal, had indeed accelerated a transformation that might otherwise have taken years to complete. What will you do about the house? Sarah asked. Will you stay in Beacon Hill? I considered this question seriously. The historic brownstone had been both sanctuary and prison during my years as Eleanor Reynolds. It contained memories both cherished and painful. I think not, I decided. It's time for a space that reflects integration rather than compartmentalization. I'll maintain ownership through the trust, but perhaps convert it to the Blackwood Foundation's new headquarters, educational programs, artist residencies, community engagement, a fitting transformation. Approving murmurs circulated around the table. The suggestion aligned perfectly with the Foundation's expanding mission, while honoring the house's historic significance. As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed, Marcus remained behind. Are you really at peace with how this resolved? He asked when we were alone. $3 million is nothing compared to what a court might have awarded from your actual assets. This was never about money, I reminded him. It was about reclaiming authenticity after years of strategic diminishment. The financial terms are irrelevant beyond ensuring appropriate consequences for actual misconduct. He nodded thoughtfully. And the children's books? Will Eleanor Reynolds continue illustrating now that Eleanor Blackwood has returned to public life? Absolutely, I replied without hesitation. That work represents the most authentic part of my existence during these years. If anything, integrating both identities will allow me to expand that creative expression rather than containing it. As evenings settled over Boston, I found myself drawn not to the Beacon Hill house, but to my rarely used penthouse overlooking the harbor. The space had been maintained as a private retreat during my sabbatical, a place where Eleanor Blackwood could exist without constraints when necessary. Standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching lights shimmer across the water, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past week. What had begun with David's betrayal had culminated in a profound reclamation of self, not just my public identity and financial authority, but a deeper integration of all aspects of my existence. My phone chimed with a final message from Diane. Settlement agreement finalized. David has signed all documents. Account restrictions lifted as agreed. Divorce filing updated with confidential terms. Case closed. I smiled at the elegant simplicity of those last two words. Case closed indeed. Not just the legal proceedings, but the chapter of my life spent living in artificial limitation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Board meetings, investment decisions, public appearances as the fully revealed Eleanor Blackwood. But it would also bring continued illustration work, creative pursuits, and authentic connections unbound by deception or strategic withholding. The woman reflected in the window glass was neither solely Eleanor Reynolds nor exclusively Eleanor Blackwood, but a singular, integrated self, wealthy beyond measure not just in financial terms, but in the freedom to exist authentically after 15 years of calculated constraint. The case was closed. The integration had begun, and the future stretched before me with unlimited possibility, unburdened by the weight of necessary deception or unwanted pretense. I raised my glass in a silent toast to that future and to the unexpected catalyst who had made it possible. In his attempt to take what little he thought I had, David had inadvertently freed me to reclaim everything I was. Sometimes, I reflected with satisfaction, justice arrives through the most unexpected channels, even through the actions of those who never intended to serve it. 2 weeks later, I sat in my new office at Blackwood Financial, reviewing quarterly performance reports while occasionally glancing at sketches for my next children's book spread across a side table. The integration of my professional and creative lives had proven remarkably seamless, as though both aspects had always been waiting to exist in harmony. Charlotte knocked softly before entering with the afternoon's correspondence. "The final transfer to David's managed trust has been completed," she reported, "and this just arrived from his new address in Providence." She handed me a simple white envelope bearing my name in David's distinctive handwriting. Curious, I opened it to find a brief handwritten note. "Eleanor, I still don't understand why you lived as you did for 15 years, but I've come to accept that I never truly knew you. Perhaps that was my failure rather than yours. The regulatory process has been humbling. The structured agreement you offered was more generous than I deserved, considering what investigation revealed about my practices. I won't apologize for leaving. We both know our marriage had hollowed years ago. But I do regret the manner of my departure and the 15 years of assumptions that preceded it. Perhaps someday I'll understand what you meant about perspectives and limitations. Until then, I wish you well in your reclaimed life." "David," I said. The note aside, neither particularly moved nor upset by its contents. David's limited self-awareness was exactly what I had expected, sufficient to acknowledge wrongdoing, insufficient to truly comprehend the nature of our relationship's fundamental imbalance. But that was no longer my concern. His journey toward understanding, or not, would unfold entirely separate from mine. "Anything requiring response?" Charlotte asked. "No," I replied, returning my attention to the quarterly reports. "Just closure." As Charlotte departed, I glanced at the children's book illustrations waiting for my attention. Vibrant, whimsical drawings for a story about a chameleon who changed colors not to hide, but to express different aspects of itself. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it resonated with profound truth. For 15 years, I had changed my colors to accommodate David's need for superiority, but those colors had always been authentically mine, merely selected to serve a specific purpose in a specific context. Now, I was free to display my full spectrum without calculation or constraint. I turned to the waiting illustrations, adding details to the chameleon's expressive eyes that revealed the creature's essential nature regardless of its changing external appearance. Beneath the shifting colors, there had always been a consistent self, watching and waiting for the moment when full expression would again become possible. That moment had arrived. The chameleon was free, and Eleanor Blackwood, illustrator, financial, leader, and integrated self, was finally fully visible in all her complexity. Case closed, indeed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.